Hello viewers, welcome back to my channel. Today I will be talking about the Pinnacle 21 checks triggered for AESER. In SEDC SDTM, SER is a variable found in the adverse event domain. It stands for the serious event and it indicates whether an adverse event is considered serious according to the regulatory definitions such as ICH, E2A or E2B. Its purpose is to indicate whether the adverse event met any of the seriousness criteria. What we mean by the seriousness criteria? There are 8 seriousness criteria variables which tells us to whether the adverse event is serious or not. So as I'm showing you right now, there are 8 criteria variables which are AES scan, which is the adverse event which involves cancer, or AES disability, AES hospitalization, AES MIE, that is the medically important adverse events, or the AES CONG, which is if there is any disabilities, birth defects which is resulting. Then there is the AESDTH, which is whether the adverse event has resulted in any death. Then the AES life, if the adverse event is life-threatening, then this variable will be populated. And then there is the AESOD, that is, it resulted with the overdose of, the adverse event resulted with the overdose of the treatment drug. So based on these 8 severity criteria variables, if AESER is Y, then at least one of the seriousness criteria variable should also be Y, and vice versa. That means that if any of these 8 criteria variables is Y, then that particular adverse event can be categorized as serious adverse event. Now, if the adverse event has resulted in death, that means the AESDTH variable is populated as Y, then that also means that the outcome of that adverse event is fatal because the patient has died because of that severe that adverse event. So if that is the case, then what are the dependent variables which will get populated? So as you can say that if any adverse event is resulting in death, that means the date of death will also be can also be categorized as the end date of that adverse event, which is the AEENDTC. And since it's the date of death, then the DTHDTC variable in DM domain will also have the same information as the AEENDTC. And since it resulted in death, the DTHFL flag in DM will also be populated. So here you can see that if adverse event is resulting in death, then we not only have the AEOUT as populated as fatal, but the date of death will be equal to the date of adverse event end date, and the flag will be populated in DM domain. So using this logic, you can see there is a relationship being created between the AE and DM dataset. So after understanding the relationship diagram between this AESCR and its other dependent severity seriousness criteria, let's see an example of the CRF form where the adverse event in questions are being asked. So here I am showing you one of the CRF form where the adverse event information is being captured at the site. Here you can see that we have a question for whether the adverse event is serious, and if it is serious, then we have the dependent seriousness criteria variables being populated. It is an annotated CRF, so you can see that serious question is being annotated to AESCR, and if serious, then the dependent information, whether that adverse event resulted in death or life threatening or and so on, are being annotated accordingly. So what we understand from this is that if categories of serious events are collected secondary to a leading question, the values of the variables that capture reasons and adverse event is considered serious. That means here you can see the first question is whether the adverse event was serious. So it is the primary question now, and based on its response, whether it is yes or no, we have the second question being asked. If the adverse event is serious, that is the answer to AESER is yes, then the secondary question, which is the secondary, what was the result of this serious adverse event, whether it resulted in death or was this adverse event life threatening or is resulted in hospitalization and so on, that will be captured as as an answer to a secondary question as shown in this form. However, based on the design of the CRF form, there is another way. If the CRF is structured so that a response is collected for each seriousness criteria, all category variables will be populated and SCR variable will be derived. That is, if the situation is reversed, if instead of asking this question whether the adverse event was serious, we ask whether any of these 8 criteria variables are having a response of yes, then that means that the adverse event is serious. So in that scenario, the AESCR will be derived based on the response captured in the criteria variables, which are the seriousness criteria variables. So now, after understanding the relationship of AESCR with its seriousness criteria variable, let's see what the Pinnacle 21 rules relate to AESCR are. So first is that no qualifier set to Y when AE is serious. Again, it tells us that if adverse, that it comes from the question that when the adverse event is categorized as a serious adverse event, then out of the 8 seriousness criteria variables, any one of those variables should have at least a value of Y. And if that is not the case, then this check will be fired that no qualifiers variables are set to Y when AE is serious. Secondly, as we have seen in the initial slide, that if AE is out is fatal, that is the adverse event has resulted in a death of the subject, then the AESDTH should be populated as Y. And if that is not the case, then the AESDTH will be then this check will be fired that the AESDTH is not Y when A is out is equals to fatal. Similarly, since the adverse event has resulted in death, then the DTH flag in DM domain should be equals to Y. And if that is not the case, we will have the third check, which is the DTHFL does not equals to Y when AESDTH is equals to Y is being fired. See, moving on to the same lines, the end date, the adverse event end date for fatal AE should be same as the death date in DM. Failing which, the fourth check will be fired that the AENDTC for fatal A is not same as the DTHDTC variable in DM domain. The next check is that if one of the criteria here, which they have specifically asked, is that the AESOD, which is the severe seriousness criteria for overdose, that when AESOD is equals to Y, then that means that at least one of the 8 criteria is equals to Y, then the AESER should be equals to Y, but here it is not equals to Y. So in this way, uh, the checks will be fired if any of these rules are not followed. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Let me know in comments if you want me to cover any specific topic.